My name is Chris. I'm on the LA TAP. I am the president of Build Smart, and we are helping firms with automation. And funny enough, Alison's company actually helps with automation as well in a different way. But Alison is the founder and head of product at Space Plan Wizard, an AI-powered space management and analytic platform built for architects, designers, and workplace strategists. Created to address the shift toward hybrid work, the platform supports space planning, programming, and benchmarking workflows, enabling teams to evaluate and plan workspace environments with greater speed and accuracy. Prior to founding Space Plan Wizard, Alison worked as an architectural designer and a strategist at a leading commercial architecture firm, contributing to high-profile Fortune 500 projects across multiple sectors internationally. Frustrated by the lack of innovative tools and the reliance on siloed data and legacy platforms, she set out to build a solution tailored to the evolving needs of the AEC space. Joining her is Mary Clare, Director of Customer Success at Space Plan Wizard. With more than 25 years of experience as an interior designer and workplace strategist, Mary Clare has worked across projects ranging from global portfolio optimization to bespoke workplace initiatives. Her expertise includes workplace strategy, programming, blocking and stacking, portfolio planning, and change management. As Space Plan Wizard, she works closely with organizations to onboard the platform, identify key workplace metrics, and translate data into actionable insights that support confident, data-driven workplace and real estate decisions.
Thank you. Hi everyone, so I'm Alison. I'm one of the wizards here at Space Plan Wizard, and you'll hear from Mary Clare shortly. I noticed throughout the day, we sit here on the technology side, but of course you heard we came from your seat as architects. And there's an interesting statistic, so our focus is workplace in particular. And there are currently 5 generations in the workforce. And if you think about that for a minute, there are those who had no internet, right, when they started their careers, and others who don't know anything else. So you can imagine then how different people's expectations are and knowledge is, and what they demand and require, and therefore how differently we approach this AI transition. And I mention it because I didn't hear the word empathy at all, and that is our North Star, and I think it's really important to reframe sometimes to ensure we're all speaking sort of that same shared language. Some of us get really nerdy about the tech stack and the layers and all of that, and others don't. And sometimes we're at a place where it's hard sometimes to ask those questions. But it's really hard to keep up with things, right? And be stakeholders if you're the one making the decision, if you don't really understand the framework at a really even just elementary level. We often say that it doesn't start adoption at the enterprise level. It really starts at the personal level, even with these bigger, basic, more agnostic tools. But often we like to start off with saying, what are these words we're all using, and are we sharing the same language to ensure we're all speaking the same way? And then you can be just incredibly informed when you are speaking with a lot, often more junior, really tech savvy, the users, we say, as opposed to the buyers. So of course, the umbrella is AI, but underneath that, we hear some of these terms, some better than others, but machine learning. And we're going to dive into, after we tell you, kind of the application we built for the AEC space. This is the lane that we really focus on. We're very intentional about the AI applications that we build and use. What I love about machine learning, so that is a subset within, if you think about, in our case, like floor plans, a lot of people hear me say, I find them magical, even if they're a PDF with siloed data and it's a piece of paper. There is a lot of data in there that we don't unlock a lot of the times or get siloed, but it's a really beautiful use case for being able to extract it with machine learning, with those images, when we teach it repeated patterns. And then when we think about the neural networks, if you think of it like a human brain, it's that artificial kind of those nodes that connect different layers in how we process information. And we can get kind of as deep as we want with what's called deep learning, more complex or simple models. So we have what's called like an input layer where the data comes in. Then there are these hidden layers, and they can get really complex. And then the output, where we've assessed it and then generate. And then there are certain foundational concepts. So thinking first about paradigms, right? So how do we teach that AI brain? For example, models, in our case, we used a supervised basis, right? So for example, if I want my images to be trained to tell me where a desk is in an office floor plan, I can tell it. I can tag and label that data, and with those repetitive patterns, it can learn it. There's also unsupervised ways we can do so, where it helps unlock more hidden patterns as well. And then the brain itself, so the model architecture. So what does the brain kind of look like? So I like to equate it to, there's different models that are built for different things. So just like humans, some of us are really good in math, others are great in languages, that kind of thing. So it's really a similar way of looking at the way the AI works. And then of course, beyond just classifying and extracting data, which is the lane we sit in, and I love as an application, there is also, of course, we've heard of more generative. And this is really the shift we've seen, right? Traditional software, what makes this all possible now is, we were training it with very explicit rules, and now we can predict, we can train it on patterns. But then when we layer in like memory and other things, and context, it can start to produce for us, right? So patterns and original, more generative content. And then of course, if you've interacted with the chatbot for AI agents, the difference, of course, those were more reactive. It now can start to understand our goals and generate even, plans, strategies, and take actions on our behalf.
And so we understand a little bit better.
Is it on?
Is it
There you
on?
go.
Yeah, there it is. The AI brain and how it learns, and we understand that it can produce endless amounts of data points. And we also understand that it can do this much faster than we humans could ever do. We used to do this all by pen and paper and others. So while it really starts to take the drudgery out of everything, it starts to beg the question, how does our role shift from doing the drudgery work and taking all those time-consuming tasks to being something that's far more intuitive and allows us to direct the intelligence. So we put the human back in the loop where we become an iterative process, and then we're using the AI as our tool to be a much more performance-enhancing tool, human performance-enhancing tool. So at the end of the day, it allows us to time back to apply the critical thinking, go a little bit deeper into the questions that we might be asking that we maybe didn't have before, and start applying some values and judgments. And so in process, this might look something like this, and we talk about this in terms of the responsibilities and the risks, but we start out by framing a question. And when we frame that question, we're asking the system to respond to us in a certain way that's customized to us. We're also layering in the context of everything that we know about the problem that we're trying to solve for our client. So we might be asking the business goals and values and understanding their workforce and their workflow. Once we give that information, we're getting data back. And so once that data comes back, it's our jobs to validate that information and the truth and authenticity of that information, because at the end of the day, we're accountable for that information. And of course, we know that it can hallucinate, and it can be very confident in how it hallucinates. So once we correct that information, we also get the opportunity to fine-tune and go a little bit deeper into that questioning. So we might have other subject matter experts that are looking at user experience or overlaying sustainability or other layers of information that we maybe couldn't get to before. And then once that information comes back again, it might come back with a couple of really great scenarios. It might be coming back with 5 different incredible solutions for us. But that's when we need to start to apply our judgment. And we're the only ones that know what matters and what doesn't matter. What is the most meaningful to our clients and our clients' objectives? Is it, pursuing their culture and their workforce and what they're actually looking for? Because at the end of the day, we're responsible to communicate that recommendations, our recommendations, not AI's recommendations, back to the client. And that's really something that AI cannot do. They can't read a room, they can't understand how the audience is receiving the information. So it becomes this continuous loop of hand in hand, us and me.
So we thought we'd dive into a live demo of what we built. But we thought we would frame it first to understand, why, right? So we always ask, define the problem, and then what is that pain point in the industry and the solution? And so in our context, in workplace in particular, we'll show you today. So we, in terms of the plan, design, build, we sort of sit in the pre-design, before schematic, that planning, data assessment phase, and then post-CA, benchmarking that data, because when do we ever build what we programmed? And so what we found time and time again in our experience working at firms was that how on earth can you advise on how much square feet someone needs for their office, or what the spaces look like within that, right? The average size and the seat count, if you don't even know what they have today. And what we were always very struck by was, even the most sophisticated real estate teams, if you ask them questions like, what percentage of the fourth floor of, a building on in Mountain View, what percentage is allocated to amenity space? What's the average square feet of a private office? What's the seat mix of private offices to death? Pretty basic question, simple math, and none of them can tell you. And they definitely can't tell you instantly, and it's not centralized. So much of our data lives in various legacy kind of platforms, if they live anywhere, or they're more agnostic and they're not purposely built for our space in the AEC space. And so we can't extract very easily a lot of the metrics that make us, and support our workflow. So this was one of the main pain points we identified. What if we could help really consolidate systems, like extract data and centrally localize a lot of that data and create a knowledge base. And then you start to create also a standard within your firm too, right? So there are a lot of knowledge gaps. And then by doing that, we can unlock the beautiful thing for us, in terms of how we approach AI, is that it's not enough to just remove the drudgery and automate, but we talked about value earlier, let's unlock data we're not even tapping into, and really easily and fast. And also, when we work on one project, it should still pay for itself. We should be able to very quickly, without opening a Revit model and taking forever, or searching for, I really laughed earlier at the keynote, that huge pile of paper plans, like post-CA, that's where the data lives, and that's really a shame, and we should be leveraging that as the subject matter experts. So that's what we determined, that would be really a great use case for what we built. And then these are the specific things that I'll jump into. But the idea is, starting to create a language where we're very intentional. You heard earlier about garbage in, garbage out. If you can create a really thoughtful framework in the classification. So in our case, the language is space categories, space type, and space. And in workplace, that's really an apples to apples for data to be meaningful. It actually works. So of course, we all have a client that calls, so in our case, it's very specific, a huddle room, they'll call it a focus room. It's a type of meeting space, but the reality is it's the same seat count, the same square feet. You can really standardize the language across firms and across clients. So here now, I'll go ahead and show you what I mean. So, for example, if I were to go in here, and why not just do it live? If I were to upload a floor plan, and you can see this is essential to how we prepare our data, right? So not only is the user how you prepare it, but then the model, internally how we classify and how we train it very thoughtfully. So this is an analytics tool. So, these disclaimers you see about, warning, AI makes mistakes. Well, that's ridiculous. If you're going to generate proper analytics, then you need to be very mindful of the accuracy in what you're training, in our opinion. So you can see I have a simple partition plan that has the furniture layers turned on. So now the wizard behind the scenes, the AI, is acting on my behalf. And it's going to do things like calibrate the plan so that it can be scaled. It's going to detect the usable square feet for me on the floor and cut out the core. It'll start to classify my different space types, right? So meeting spaces, my cafes, and then there you go. So, in under 30 seconds, let's view the results. So here we go. And then I mentioned about classifying, right? Because data, this is vital. So for example, we'll have meeting, amenity support, and then individual, and I'll show you in a minute. So you're familiar probably with calibration. So now my plan is scaled, and we've trained it over time, things like don't use a stairwell maybe, or don't use a bathroom. So it found a 3-foot door for me internally, and it entered it, and I hit save. And so now you can see I'm not doing the data entry, I'm overseeing it. And so now you can see it was able to draw for me the interior, the usable square feet. And it's training now to cut out that vertical penetration in the core. Of course, if there are things I see, very simple design tools if I want to adjust anything. And of course, my favorite part, it detected all these, hundreds of spaces on my behalf, right? So in Workplace, we refer to me versus we. So the me is the purple, the desks and offices, right? And it's showing me, it's detecting all these different types of within the individual private office or desk. The blue are the meeting, so not only that, but it's another level of classification. It's telling me it's not just a meeting room, but let's say it's a phone room, because it met that logic, those business requirements. And then amenity and support. And then as I continue to review, so I love seat count because that'll drive a lot of the metrics that I'll show you in a minute, right? So it's counting for me, and if you think of patterns when we train models, like how many versions of a desk chair, or think of families we use in Revit or other CAD instruments, they are very similar. They lend themselves really well to training and to be able to predict and account for us. And then of course now with walls, we're training at the unit size, right, of each of these different spaces. So now when I save, you can imagine all the floors or a campus, how quickly it starts to give me all the different various counts. But this is my favorite part. So then, of course, the payout, right? So I can pick as many floors that I want, and it starts to roll up all the data now, which now I didn't have to jump into another platform, and it just live, it's doing all of these, counts and metrics for me.
And this is what we used to have to do manually, of course, at the end of the day. We have to do all of these graphics by ourselves. But this is the beginning of a narrative when you're talking to your client, because and something again that was often overlooked because there just wasn't the time or wasn't the fee to do this initially. But we have to start with a baseline set of metrics because if we don't measure it, we can't improve it, right? So and this is great because again, you're sitting with your client and imagine you can produce this in a matter of seconds. But now as subject matter experts, we can look at this data and provide information on where we might see some of the deficiencies. And some of these that we really love to see, that the meeting seat ratio to work seat, if that's not 1-to-1, meaning there isn't one meeting seat to every desk seat or workstation seat, that's where we like to be, at least, if not more. Otherwise, we don't need a talent survey to tell you that your employees are probably coming in and struggling to find a place to meet because there isn't enough places to meet. So that's really why some of the RTO starts to fail. And then of course with hybrid work, and we're coming in for the primary purpose of collaboration, we look at the me to we space, where the me space again is the desks and the workstations, and the we space is the meeting amenity and support. And so we're really seeing that the me space drive downwards from 50% and lower because again, we need to have the right ratio of spaces. The other thing that I love to look at is the circulation rate, because so many times we underestimate what the circulation really needs to be if we don't have a baseline to start from and we're just building a program moving forward. And I like to say the proof is in the pudding, because we can always go back and look at the plan very quickly and see, oh wow, it really is 49% or something else. But it's very telling and very eye-opening. So now we can have a real-life conversation with the client. What's working today, what isn't working, and then start to build a program in the same platform, of course, at a fraction of the time, and start to pull all of these different levers that we're seeing today with hybrid work, utilization. Maybe there's future trends that we're not even thinking about today that we want to be able to produce a program very quickly, or a number of programs. And then as we scroll down here, we're also getting to further minutia of the detail. We want to understand what the right ratios of spaces are, or workstations, and down here we've got meeting spaces, understanding the amount of phone booths or meeting rooms that are required per person or per seat.
Yeah, and it's well, even just for, educating a more junior designer, let's say, if you're in the design phase, understanding like what is the baseline today of your client, right? So what is the average size of these various space types that they have? And you can imagine, or what are the ratios? As Mary Claire said, it'll reveal deficiencies really quickly, or where they are benchmarked. But then imagine being able to build this library up instantly and clicking without having to write a formula or tag things, or being able to just make some nuances to the data.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think also to the educational standpoint, you know, looking at junior designers coming into the workforce, and looking at how their role starts to shift. We talked about validating the data, and this is a great opportunity. Most of this information is not part of the education curriculum in interior design in the first place, and so oftentimes it's a good reminder even for a senior person who maybe forgets what one of the industry definitions might be. But now as a junior designer, you can come into this space and start to better understand what those ratios looks like for a successful project versus an unsuccessful project.
So sort of as a takeaway, you can see like I know sometimes it's very provocative when we say things like AI won't take our jobs, but we're big believers in like what is often referred to as the digital soul. And you can see sort of layering on these sort of statistical predictions and training it in a very thoughtful, mindful, purposeful way. And you layer on certain constraints and guardrails and tone and behaviors. It all makes the AI, these are the core qualities that make it feel very intelligent. And they kind of create this illusion, right, of a personality, but it's the human AI collaboration that we lean into. And then just in terms of some other technical jargon, things like when we talk about layers, to recap, we started sort of the data layer where you're training it, what the information that you're, feeding the AI, and then layering on things like modeling and reasoning for that intelligence layer. And then of course, adding context, the ability to predict those patterns and interactions is the memory layer. And of course, we all have, it's very subjective how you define safety and ethics, but that alignment layer that can guide the behavior. And then of course, the last being the human interaction and how we interact with it. So we like to leave you with this and think about where you fit in. I saw Reid Hoffman, he talks a lot about AI, and I loved how he classified it, and be honest. So of course, as the labels suggest, the Zoomers, right, full speed ahead, enthusiasts, the Bloomers who are maybe more cautiously optimistic, but leaning into it, but with some guardrails and regulation. Then of course, you have the Gloomers, much more pessimistic, still adopting it or understanding, that train left the station. It's not a futuristic promise, but they figure there'll be some sort of mass disruption and layoffs. And then, of course, the doomers. There are plenty of them. The existential threat, right, that the world is over, and they're very much opposed to it. So we always ask people, think about who are you and people you work with, right, because there's a lot of dissent, even within cultures and in companies, between generations and the like. So that's about it. Yeah. Good.
For the sample, when you loaded in the floor plan for the office space, before you got to that point,
yeah,
what information on the front end were you giving the software to tell it what were you telling it this is an office space, this is located here, so that it kind of had context, and you just like, here's the floor plan, let's see if you get it right?
A little of everything, right? And then it was a lot of experimentation too about like what models, like what algorithms, like how we train it, how it's going to react, like how for us, because really our North Star is the credibility and the accuracy.
Right.
Design is a different animal. This is really analytics, right? So for us, that math needs to be right. Like I'd rather it, so you'll notice like not every space was actually tagged and detected in that live demo because it didn't understand something that maybe was there weren't enough certain custom spaces in the data set. So we set a high threshold to fail so that it doesn't hallucinate. It does certainly allow you though, as the human, to go in, and there's the simple design tools too. You can reassign, you can rename, you can remeasure, all of that. But yes, there's a lot of trial and error of teaching it. And in fact, we use a couple different things, not only the images themselves and like computer vision, but based on what's on that plan, sometimes there's a room label, right? So we lean into like the text as well. There's a lot of things that we do, but there's a lot of a lot of floor plans out there that aren't tagged right. They don't look right. They're not. So that's the hard part. We have our standard of what we believe it should be, and of course firms can can edit it. But trying to create a standard, that's at the core. We're very rigid about the right classification, the right labels for the data.
So I'm just curious, is it, you built this model on your own, as in an internal tool, or is it shared, it's gonna be something that's made available?
It's a proprietary internal one, so it's like an enterprise.
Is it built on its own AI model? You guys have kind of,
It's not technically like AI native, but it's in-house, and it's very in that sense it's like very specific and proprietary. Yeah. Yes.
Run through a use case of if something changes in renovations will have to be scanned again.
Because that never happens.
Never happens.
How about it happens in like DD, you know what I mean? Or so it's funny. And the platform does a lot more. But you can re-upload. So like think of like that trace underlay, you can replace it and it retains it. The app actually in the UI asks you, do you want to retain all the AI generated content or do you want to rerun it? So often people tell it to not rerun it and then they'll retag the one private office that was turned into a meeting space, that kind of thing. So yes, because that happens actually a lot. You're absolutely right.
How about connectivity to other systems?
So we have some like proof of so right now you can upload like a PDF, JPEG, or PNG because sometimes that's our only source of truth, right? So we're working, we're in the Autodesk developer network, so we're working on like ingesting AutoCAD and then Revit. But eventually, yes, there are a lot of integrations in like proof of concept stage on our roadmap. Yeah, we get asked a lot because you can imagine from sensor companies, there's so many other things that are the obvious next stage, right, to feed data in or out.
Do you have, and I missed your presentation, like versions, schemes or options and compare them? Sometimes.
Oh, do you think like design options?
Yes.
Like different test beds or design options? So it's interesting. So an interesting application we've noticed users. So the way I had like the actual existing building, floor 3, 4, 5. So users will upload design option 1, 2, 3 as the different floors, and then it instantly spits out the dashboard so they can see the delta, right? Like maybe design option A is 30% meeting spaces on the floor, but the next one's 35, right? So if there's a minimum threshold they have to hit for the client, it very quickly tells them that data without having to build the pie charts, and then it's instant. So yeah, that's actually really an unexpected and really nice application we've seen. Yeah. Yeah.
Comment this, or,
Sure.
Is this platform can be used for scanning like an as-built drawing that is like scanned, like physical papers, and does it recognize those kind of rooms that we can put it in the digital kind of like an asset management?
So is your source, like, is it a PDF or?
And if it's let's say someone scanned it as like a rasterized image.
Oh, I see what you mean. So it's more like a visual.
Pixels.
Yes.
So right now, that's a good question. So right now, we've seen everything get uploaded. That we have these tips, like how to get the best out of the AI, and most users don't follow it. So it's funny actually. So ideally, it's not. There's no title block. There's no color fill and all of that, and the grid lines. And, so it's more noise. So right now, no. But I'd be curious what it would generate, right? If it was office space, it might actually based on what the lines, what the model detects. But people upload some funny things. And then we get asked a lot about, obviously there are a lot of growth channels like healthcare and other things that are similar, or we've seen labs and like sports arenas. And you can certainly edit it and tag, which is still automated and much faster. Like Mary Claire mentioned, the current workflow now is like colored pens on a piece of paper. That's crazy. So, I don't know.
I have that question, if we went far above and beyond workplace.
Right.
We focus maybe stadiums, sports facilities, and aviation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of repetition of spaces
Right.
that can be trained as well. So is it easy to create the metrics and the, ratios like you do? Because there are certain ratios and thresholds that you
Right.
are very particular for each different. Is that something that can be customized?
We could ask this. So currently, the dashboard, the output is the way it is. Now, of course, we're all designers. You can change the color, the icons, and all that. You can change the labels though. So it's even in workplace. So we've seen like some stadiums and labs in here, and they create a custom. The AI doesn't detect it, but we create it. The human can create the custom name.
They
And
can create their own, manipulate like the ratios, because for workplace, there are very specific.
exactly. So right now, no. But that would be the next. That's on the roadmap in terms of how
Would
to.
that be something that you will work with particular clients, like for example, healthcare is very similar to work?
It's similar, but you're right. The dashboard's not perfect. There's nuance. So yes, so there's some accounts now that have those other verticals that with their feedback that we have been, yeah. So if there's any new ones I'm not thinking of, but we're always very happy to. It's the end user who should get served too. Yeah, and we deploy we have new features or enhancements every week. That's the thing about being able to. You can build really fast. Someone said earlier, fail fast and do it often. That's the beauty here. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I would say just as a takeaway too, build in that the culture where we don't know what we don't know yet, and it's very early. So allow it within the ROI, the ability to fail or test the wrong thing. That's just all part of it to get to the place we need to get.
More questions?
Was it Kevin?
Yeah, I just was going back to her question earlier, but if you scan something and a piece of paper, because that's all you might have in her as-built, wouldn't it be able to read it as a JPEG or PDF and be able to do the calculation?
Yeah, if it's black and white, or if it's similar to that, if it's literally blue, like a blueprint, there's no absolutely. It will understand all of that. If she was talking about maybe sometimes people have wayfinding on it, and they have images. That's not what's necessarily intended for, but yeah, I've seen some ways to look at things that still generate, even if it's a space line and gets you started, right, and automates it, and then it's centralized. You can go through all your projects and clients in your work and find other things really fast. So that as knowledge base is really helpful. Yeah.
In my past, I used to work with Workplace, and some of the designers, especially on the ones that they were doing work for law firms, they will use the traditional sketch, right? They will basically draw their sketch to lay it out. That's the way they process everything. Would he recognize the hand sketch? It has the similar.
Some people have uploaded hand sketches, and it did within reason work actually. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you so much. Just taking a step back, you existed as a company prior to this software. Sorry. Prior to this software, I don't know. You existed prior to this software, correct? And then you built this software internally to basically, it looks like incredibly improve the efficiency of what you were doing by hand. Is that correct? So maybe you could speak about. You weren't in the software building business prior to this, but now you are. And so how do you see yourself as a company moving forward? Are you like a hybrid software company, also a design consulting company? Or it just seems like this is a really nicely produced piece of software. And I can imagine that every one of us in this room has our own version of this we want to build. Can you just speak about how long did it take you? What was the catalyst? Obviously you had an internal problem to solve, and this was it out of left field because AI got good enough, or something you've been trying to do for years, or a lot of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course, thank you. I came from a large firm, and it was exhausting. I wouldn't even go on my hours because I wanted to do my job right, and it just wasn't the tools, and it was really manual. And I got put on a 7-building campus, and 7,000 people, and I had pieces of paper like piled up on the floor to find. It was really breathtaking in my opinion. So I handed it in, and the joke was like, I'm gonna be back, like I'm gonna quit and go off. I'm here from San Francisco. I'm gonna go to Silicon Valley and raise the money, and then I'm gonna go back to all my peers and like pilot. And so that's what we did. So we're like a tech startup out from the Bay Area. So independent, but now so many, dear friends and colleagues, or who moved to other firms, are now on the platform. So it's just a very traditional way like that. But yes, we like to say we have an unfair advantage, right? So so in the Valley we call it founder market fit, right? So all these terms you have to learn, funny terms. So the idea that we were there in the trenches and felt the pain, and we wanted to leave to do something about it. So if that helps. So it's a very kind of traditional path in that sense. So we're not affiliated then with any firm, but have colleagues and former recovering architects that are still friends.
And I think just being a workplace strategist for so many years and working on many, many really large projects from the inside out in Saudi and in Sacramento and other places, it's all about the people engaging with the built environment, and so many times it's building from the outside in. So this is a great way of studying the inside out and applying, gross up factors on top of that. But the time savings alone is just incredible. You can think of, how many tabs in a worksheet you might have if you've got a really, really large scale project in Saudi that's maybe in meters and not imperial. And how much time that really takes to do, especially when you're not working in metric. But so much time savings. Yeah.
Hi, great presentation. What is the threshold when we would engage you? Is this a small TI project, or is this software best suited for sort of office campus? That's my first question. And then my second question is, you mentioned that clients don't know what percentage of space is conference versus phone booth. And I think that's interesting because I feel like I've ran into that before. So do you see whether it be you or someone else inventing something for something more client user friendly where they could document their space instead of hiring an as-built company?
Absolutely. So this is like a traditional software as a service, right? So we don't do any of the consulting or data input, anything like that. But I would say the primary user profiles, it's interesting you mentioned that about the occupier. So of course, architecture and designers, but what we found was often their clients, the end users, they have their own account, right, to manage their whole portfolio. And then by giving them more agency, they're really paralyzed right now, especially with hybrid work, of what decisions to make. The knee-jerk reaction is they have too much space, but that's not always the case. It's just misallocated. But they don't even know how to send out an RFP to retain all of you if they are not armed with data to bring to leadership. So if they can centralize their portfolio better and more easily and speak the language that we all speak and all be on the same platform, it just drives the decision much quicker, and then gives you more work. And then, but then to your first question, clearly, Mary Claire and I worked on very large scale work. You can see the efficiencies, right? But we actually find that a sweet spot is one floor, 10, 20,000 square feet. And those TIs, as you know, they take a lot of time and resources. And so to be able to really automate it really efficiency, it's just as meaningful, we find, for the ROI. Yeah.
Do you guys use the data for market trends or kind of any of that stuff, or publish it, or is that just proprietary information you keep, or?
I know, we don't, so it's funny, you talked to the conversation a lot about data earlier. Everyone asks for it and wants it, but then doesn't want to share it. So that's a whole other conversation for the industry. I would say just ask yourself, is it PII? Really, what is it that you're holding back? It was mentioned in the keynote, because certainly there are things that you have in your firm that are a secret sauce, but counting desk chairs, I would argue, or what they look like, is maybe not one of them. So.
We have time for one or two more questions. Anyone?
Oh my gosh.
Tesla?
Actually, the question I'm gonna ask
Uh-oh.
is not about the tool. It's not about the workflow. It's actually about you as an entrepreneur and a woman. How easy or how hard has your journey been?
So our joke is that every conference we go to, there's never a line for the women's bathroom. And I think that sums it up. Also, if you want to get funding, without that, there's no access to build. And less than 2% of money last year in Silicon Valley went to female founders. So I doubt all the ideas were bad. So that probably helps sum it up. But yeah, it is what it is. It's quite surprising, yeah. But that's where we are right now, I think. But I will say about AI, so much of that, of course, is there weren't women, with engineering degrees or being champions, right, in school. But this, I believe, is a level playing field for the first time. Because now that we have like half the, right, graduate degrees or math degrees, now, and we're all like in kindergarten with AI, I believe this is the first time you are starting to see like heads of go-to-market and that kind of thing at really large public companies who actually are female. They're not on any of the boards or anything like that yet, but you can see it. I do actually see a sea change. But the struggle really is at like our level, access. And if you don't have access, especially to capital, you're like dead before you start.
Congratulations.
Thank you for that question. Thank you. So.
Any other questions? Well, we have a special treat. Erica has a special treat, I think, right now, for everyone who stayed. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's thank you very much.